October 27th, 1947 is the day when Indian forces illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Since then, the Jammu and Kashmir dispute is the unfinished agenda of the partition of the Indian subcontinent. It is also one of the oldest issues on the agenda of the United Nations Security Council. Over the years, a concrete attempt has been made by India to obscure the fundamental legal and political aspects of the dispute. In particular, to justify its occupation of Jammu and Kashmir and to deny the Kashmiris their inalienable right to self-determination through a free and impartial plebiscite as provided by several Security Council resolutions. Jammu and Kashmir, one of the largest princely states, the state with an overwhelming majority of Muslims of more than 75%, persecuted by the Hindu Dogra Maharaja Hari Singh and his army, wished to accede to the future dominion of Pakistan. In October 1947, a freedom movement was brewing in Jammu and Kashmir.
In 1947, the people of Jammu and Kashmir fought a war of independence. It was not a rebellion. It was not a law and order situation as it was characterized by the Indian rulers or the Maharaja of Kashmir. It was a war of independence. And the Muslims in particular of the state of Jammu and Kashmir decided to wage this war because they had concluded that the Maharaja and the Indian rulers, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, Lord Mountbatten at that time, Sardar Patel, Gandhi, and all these leaders were conspiring to prepare the ground for accession of Kashmir to India. And the Kashmiri Muslims were angry on two counts. One was the tyranny of the Maharaja. The second was that it was their natural aspiration to be part of Pakistan.
On the question of princely states, the British government made a statement that after the transfer of power paramountcy will lapse, the states will then be completely free to join one of the two contemplated dominions or to become separate autonomous units. His Majesty's government hopes that all states will associate themselves with one or the other of the two dominions. Today, India claims that the accession of Jammu and Kashmir is perpetual and irrevocable. However, from the outset, the fact and validity of the alleged accession was highly questionable for several reasons.
India claims that the state of Jammu and Kashmir acceded to India on this day. This is a false and unsupported claim. 1. No authentic copy of the instrument of accession signed by the Maharaja has ever been produced by the government of India. 2. In any case, the Maharaja was not a free agent at the time of the so-called accession to India on 26 October 47, since he had signed a standstill agreement with Pakistan. This standstill agreement created a legal bar to the Maharaja's capacity to alter the existing position unilaterally. 3. On 26 October 1947, when the Maharaja allegedly signed the instrument of accession to India, he had lost effective control over most of the state of Jammu and Kashmir due to a popular Kashmiri uprising. He was fleeing the state and was no longer competent to sign the so-called instrument.
Some scholars have questioned the sequence of events and doubt the instrument of accession, if ever signed, was signed before the occupation of Jammu and Kashmir by the Indian forces. Historian Alastair Lamb, Stanley Wolpert and Victoria Schofield have pointed to the documentary evidence along with the fact that Maharaja was en route to Jammu on October 26th to conclude that there was no signed instrument of accession by the time Indian forces landed in Srinagar. The presence of forces in Kashmir on October 27th effectively renders any instrument signed afterwards null and void legally.
The instrument of accession to India, which was supposedly signed by the Maharaja of Kashmir, was fraudulent. And this fact has been established not just by Pakistani historians or Kashmiri historians, but by foreign historians like Alastair Lamb or American researchers. They have independently, impartially established that this instrument was false. And if at all Maharaja signed that document, and there is no proof that he did, it was done under duress and coercion.
According to the Article 52 of the Vienna Convention, a treaty is void if its conclusion has been procured by the threat or use of force in violation of the principles of international law embodied in the Charter of the United Nations. Even if hypothetically the fact of accession is accepted, India's own subsequent actions have invalidated it. The Indian Constitution provided the terms under which the Maharaja's accession was signed, surrendering only the limited powers for defense, foreign affairs and currency, but retaining all other authorities with the state. Jammu and Kashmir was the only state which negotiated the terms of its membership with the Indian Union. Neither side could amend or abrogate it unilaterally, except in accordance with the terms of that pact. Following the Indian military intervention, the Indian reign of terror began. By November 1947, thousands of Muslims were massacred by mobs and paramilitaries led by the Hindu Dogra army. Many Muslim families were expelled from different parts of Jammu province. On November 5, 1947, the Dogra army soldiers began an organized evacuation of the Muslims from Jammu.
The Jammu Massacre, as it is generally called, was in fact a genocide in Jammu and Kashmir, and particularly in Jammu, in the months of October and November 1947. You know, people think that the massacre took place in November 1947, but the preparation for it had been done for months. Although plebiscite was never held, but plebiscite was being mentioned, and Maharaja was afraid that a Muslim majority in the Kashmir Valley and Jammu would vote against him and vote for Pakistan and vote against the Indian Union. And therefore, they conspired. They conspired to bring about a military invasion. They also conspired to reduce the numbers of the Muslims. So they tried to change the demography. And in that heinous endeavor, what they did was that they cleansed Muslims, particularly in Jammu. Independent scholars and international reporters at that time, reporting, for instance, in the Times or the Statesman, have established that 237 Muslims were massacred between the months of October and November 1947. The horrendous events have been recorded extensively. Ved Bhasan, who was a witness of this massacre, he's recorded all the details, as a matter of fact, and he's documented, chronicled what happened. Muslims were first demobilized, disarmed, and then they were given these false assurances that they were being transported to Sialkot, and on the Sialkot Jammu road they were massacred mercilessly by the Maharaja's Dogra army, the Indian National Army, and Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh operatives and militants.
The unilateral and illegal action by India of revocation of Article 370 and 35A on 5th of August was a flagrant breach not only of the solemn pact with the Kashmiris, but also violative of the provisions of the Indian Constitution itself by unilaterally altering the status of IIOJ&K without any recourse to the Kashmiri people. India has materially breached the so-called Instrument of Accession, the Shimla Agreement and United Nations Security Council resolutions. The Jammu and Kashmir dispute cannot be forgotten. Its people are determined to secure their inalienable right to self-determination. Their struggle is a just struggle for a fundamental right guaranteed under the UN Charter, international law and the resolutions of the Security Council. Pakistan is a party to the dispute. It will fulfill its obligations as a party.
Indian actions violate the resolutions of the United Nations Security Council on Jammu and Kashmir. The resolutions clearly prescribe that the final disposition of the disputed territory should be decided by its people through a free and impartial plebiscite.
The government and people of Pakistan remain steadfast in their adherence to the Security Council resolutions and in our strong support to the right of the Kashmiri people to self-determination.